Okay, so I'll kick things off. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the topic of Does Cambridge Go Beyond Prototype? Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. As I said just before I started recording, if you'd like to use the chat box to introduce yourself to everyone else on the webinar today, please feel free to do so. We're a fairly small group, so no need to be shy. And also that means we can be as interactive as we like. So I'm just going to introduce the topic and the format of the session, and then we'll go into some of the panelist instructions as well. So just before I kick off, many of you will probably know that One Nucleus operates and works a lot with members and non-members in the therapeutic space. But this webinar is in collaboration with PCML Group. So we were looking for a topic that kind of spanned across the engineering and the drug development space. And that's how we came up with the concept of prototyping, because when we're looking at devices and drug development, the two processes of going from that prototyping stage to the product development and commercialization, you can look at as one and the same, really. So for those on the call who are either in one space or the other, we hope that you find the content just as valuable. So I am recording the session, so if you do want to catch up on any of the content post-webinar, that will enable you to do so, and I'll also send out a post-webinar email with a link to the recording. And also please feel free to share it with any of your fellow contacts or colleagues if you think they would also find it useful and they couldn't join today or they weren't aware of it. And just to highlight once again, we'd love to hear your comments, thoughts and observations, whether or not you're currently in the process of trying to push forward an innovative idea or product development or prototype, etc., or not. Please feel free to use the chat box to submit your questions, thoughts and observations there. So the idea for the discussion really focuses around the fact that, of course, Cambridge is a hotbed of ideas for innovation, especially in the drug development and discovery space. So we're really looking at today how we can push forward those innovations and move forward to commercialization and then scale. So ultimately, what will help Cambridge to be successful on a local and international scale. So on the panel, I'm delighted to be joined by Jack Jagura, who is Group Sales Engineer Manager at PCML. If you want to give a wave, feel free to do so, Jack.
Hello. Nice
to meet you. And then we have Eric Mays, who is CEO at Endomag. Nice to have you on the panel, Eric. Thank you.
Hi all.
Ed Inns, Associate at Cambridge Innovation Capital. Thanks for joining us, Ed. And last but not least, Stuart Lowe, Head of Biotech at TTP PLC. Thank you so much for joining, Stuart. So I was going to kick off by just asking each panelist to introduce themselves, the company they work for, and if you'd like to explain sort of how prototyping fits into the role that you currently do. So Jack, over to you first.
Yep, so as Alicia just alluded to, my name is Jack Jagura, so I'm with PCML as the Sales and Engineering Manager. So PCML, if you don't already know, is one of the UK's sort of fastest growing precision engineering and subcontract manufacturing companies. So we work alongside trusted engineering partners, design consultant suppliers, and we've got strong relationships with some of the leading companies and trusted partnerships with them. So we work in biomedical, life sciences, high-tech industrial. It's just to name a few of the type of the markets that we're into. In terms of prototyping, it's quite a big thing for us, really, because we're quite close with some of this, some of the up and coming little companies that are sort of emerging, and we'll support these people going through and looking about what is prototype and how we take it from prototype to that next level. And in terms of, what is a prototype and how we can go about saying, is it a completed prototype? Lots of different stages to this. And obviously we've got a lot of good expertise in our company where we can share our knowledge and help these companies take this idea and prototype, and we can talk through materials, we can talk through process selections, standardizations, function fit. So we can do all this as an added value service is what we offer. So yeah, complete life cycle really, from that initial idea, taking it to that, where they want to get it to mass production. So that's a general gist of where we are with that.
Thanks, Jack. And we'll come on to the definition part as well, a bit more in depth in a moment. So over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Alicia. So I'm Ed Innes. So I work at Cambridge Innovation Capital. So Cambridge Innovation Capital is a Series A investor focused on the Cambridge ecosystem, and that's sort of half of that is historically been university spinouts, and the other half being companies which are set up in the local area. It's been going since 2014, and we recently closed our second fund, which is a £225 million fund. So typically we're investing, I can't claim much credit for that. Typically we're investing £3 to £5 million as a first check into companies at the Series A stage. And it's across industries, but the common thread being sort of deep intellectual property. So it covers both technology and life sciences, and those at the intersection of the two. And I suppose that's where prototyping comes in for us, both when we're assessing investment opportunities and evaluating what stage a company's at, and then when we're invested in companies, supporting our portfolio companies with their strategy to get to the market.
Excellent, thank you so much. And Stuart, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Stuart Lowe. I'm the head of biotechnology team at TTP. So TTP helps startups and large businesses bring new processes and enter new markets. So where there's a kind of technical innovation piece to that new product or new process you're trying to develop, that's where TTP would come in. And what we're really able to provide is engineering services, product development expertise as a kind of a missing piece. So you're looking for a particular skill set, be that from the mechanical engineering to the kind of the fundamental biology. We can add that, and we can also work in these demanding timescales as well. The group I work in is mainly focused on tools for the pharmaceutical industry, so enabling more innovative products to be launched, but also process innovation as well, and process intensification. Some of the other activities we've got going on at TTP include a focus on cell and gene therapy, a focus on diagnostics, a focus on genomics and other omics. We've also got a large medical devices division as well. And where we kind of see ourselves in the prototyping process is we can help people even develop that first prototype, but also take it through the development, even developing new means of manufacturing before we then partner to transfer it to manufacture. We also consider doing small scale manufacture here at TTP as well. So yeah, happy to be on the panel.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Eric, please. Thank you.
So I'm Eric Mays, the CEO of a company called Indomag. So we are a medical device company based in Cambridge, focused on surgical guidance in oncology, particularly in breast cancer. We're pretty large scale now relative to the local market. So we treated over 250,000 patients in over 45 countries across the world and over 850 hospitals. But what I'd say is, as of today, we are exactly 15 years old. And so what I'd highlight is it takes a long time, at least in the medical device industry, to get the clinical evidence, to get clinical adoption, and that takes resource, capital, as well as a lot of prototyping. And so what prototyping means to us has meant a lot of things. We've got basically 3 different product classes. One is on its 3rd generation that we've just launched that involved prototyping, just as the very first one had done. And really what we want out of a prototype has changed over time. But I think we'll come on to that to some degree, but I'm also happy to say happy 15 years old Indomag.
Congratulations.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday. Thank you so much to all of the panel for those introductions and just sort of providing that context about how prototyping fits into your roles and your companies. So I thought, because we're looking at sort of bridging that gap between prototyping and commercialization, that it'd be helpful to kick off with a definition of what a completed prototype looks like or is, and that could mean different things to different companies and different industries, etc. Jack, I'm going to come to you first, and then if afterwards, if any of the other panelists want to elaborate or add, then please feel free to do so. So if you'd like to sort of kick us off, Jack, with that respect, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think in terms of what defines a completed prototype for us, it's probably very different to some of the other companies, some of the other guys there. For us, it's basically, working with said company and their idea, their prototype, and how we go about doing that. So once it's become a fully sort of completed prototype for us, it means basically maximize tolerances by application with like geometric datums, and the tolerances around that are all tied and all sorted. Materials as well, so made from ready available materials, the mechanical properties sufficient for the fit, form and function really as well. Process selection with respects to the number of parts required, so the profile complexity, the tolerance around that, standardization around the component and the features, also things like how we go about fastening certain things. So instead of adhesives, we'll go to fasteners, screws, and taking it through to that. Function based on testing, identifying like the features that are critical to function. So I mean, there's a real big list of sort of items to say what is a sort of completed prototype, but in a nutshell, it's basically being able to have the material, the processes behind it, and making sure everything's fit, form and function really. So that's what we would define really as a completed prototype. And then obviously from there, we can take it into that next level for the customer and hopefully make this product, in production scale really. So small batch to then obviously a bigger batch, and then hopefully, large assemblies and so on.
Thanks, Jack. Does any of the other panelists want to kind of contribute their perspective of the definition for a completed prototype?
Prototype for a purpose, and yes, ultimately that's to have something that can go into manufacturing and go into the market. But early on in a company, quite often you might see the prototype as something that you're doing just to do proof of concept. Proof of concept is different than a prototype, and I would try to draw that distinction. If you're going to try to demonstrate the technology works, that's one thing. A prototype is taking it that next stage further of going through, designing it to be manufactured, design it to be robust, and more importantly, particularly in the current context, we may talk about this later, in the changing regulatory environment that we have, being able to have something that you can go through verification and validation, sterility testing, etc., to be able to have an ethical approval to then use that in a clinical trial. Generally the goal is to take your concept and get it into the clinic, and then get some customers and start generating revenue so that your investment backers are seeing some traction and excited to continue to support you. But it's a tricky jump between those two things. So really, the furthest you can go down in that prototyping to ensure that it can tick the boxes from a regulatory perspective, so you can put it into the clinic and get that initial clinical evidence or initial customer engagement is very important.
Thanks, Eric. So I'm sure there's probably some delegates on the call who might be thinking of making this sort of transition from the prototyping to product development or commercialization stage. I'm just wondering, from the panelist perspective, if you could offer any tips on sort of a robust strategy for achieving that. So I know, Eric, you've been through that process of launching into the market. So maybe if you wanted to kick off, and then I could invite other panelists to contribute there as well.
Sure, I think I could say that we probably have a more standard pathway. So Indomag was a spin out, actually a co-spin out of the University College London and the University of Houston. So getting a tech transfer office to deal with one company is a thing, and getting two TTOs to combine their efforts and spin out an organization is quite another. But from the very beginning, the company had very modest funding, and in order to get to that first prototype, there's a strong demand to get to a regulatory approval and get what had been a nice proof of principle clinically into the market and start to get traction. That, as opposed to some other companies like, so CIC is an investor in Cambridge Medical Robotics, a local company that's raised hundreds of millions. They were able to, basically go through that process of prototyping, getting through the regulatory approvals, building up their sales teams before they'd actually commercially launched a project or product, because they had that support base. Now that is very much, I think, the exception still. Many companies are basically trying to get through a lot of hurdles, regulatory hurdles, design for manufacturer hurdles, finding are you going to be a manufacturer yourself? Do you need a scale-up partner in order to do that? And all of those things take a lot of resource. And I think this is where areas like Cambridge in particular, with its strong life science and engineering network, create an easier space to find that support and be more efficient with resource. So early on, we partnered with someone like PCML. We got a technology strategy, but it was TSB at the time, now Innovate UK grant to support that basically prototype alongside a design to manufacture process, as well as a commitment to scale up if we achieve some things. And so that was government funding supporting a little network, but utilizing local regulatory consultants and really just trying to rely on the local network as much as possible to not only de-risk what we were doing, but to be more capital efficient, because we could only raise so much capital when we were pre-revenue, pre-clinic, pre-customer. And I think that's one of the things I'd highlight in the prototyping space is there are a lot of groups around, whether it be in a vitro diagnostic, whether it be a medical device, that have not only done it, but have done it in a global context and a global regulatory environment that are local. And I think that's kind of the point of this One Nucleus event, is to try to spread that best practice and increase the viability of this local network.
Excellent. Yeah, you really highlighted there the importance of sort of the collaborative partnerships that enabled you to make that transition. Ed, when we had the prep call, I know you said from working with companies, there's sometimes some overlooked areas. Did you want to share any insights there?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things we see is more sort of strategically thinking about prototyping. So rather than saying sort of, this is how do we get this product to market, thinking about it as what are the main risks to this business. And I think Eric makes a very good point about risk and efficiency. And ultimately, the strategy needs to be how can you most efficiently de-risk basically what is a hypothesis for your business. And probably at the top of that list is there actually a market need for this product? And then it's, can we technically achieve this? And there's probably some sort of sub factors within that, which are key. Is it manufacturable? Can we get through regulatory hurdles? And I think if you flip it sort of that way around and to design almost like designing your prototyping like an experiment and trying to sort of prove your hypotheses, then you can do things in a much more efficient way, because the inverse of that is to spend as much time as you can innovating. You can always make another prototype, you can always improve it. But ultimately, if you're not answering those questions and you're not ticking off those risks, then you're not building value in the company. And so from a sort of investor's perspective, there needs to be a really clear plan and alignment with solving for those points.
Could I pick up on something that Ed said about that of being ready? With R&D teams, it's quite, everyone wants to solve the problem and they want to solve it perfectly. And then there's the question of what's good enough for the market. and that's always a challenge. And this concept of people hear about minimally viable product, it is very important for people to understand what is not only safe, but what is, minimally viable for you to get into the market in the first place, and being able to call time on the perfect prototype or the perfect system that you'll end up spending all your money and all your time and never get to the market in the first place. And I'd like to think that even though we've been around for 15 years, that we'd learned that lesson. But even with our third generation of our instrument, it's still a tearful process extracting a system out of the R&D team who wanted to make it even more perfect before we said, okay, this is good enough to go to the market now. It's important to have the R&D team hold a mirror up to themselves and say, is this good enough? And to be challenged, either by their board, their investors, their partners, or even by themselves.
Yeah, we place quite a premium on those sort of requirements driven development. So looking at user studies, what do the users require, working with our clients to say, what are your business needs, what are your projections for sales, because even something like how many are we going to sell in the first year can influence the manufacturing strategy. So we also recognize that these requirements can be fluid, and for young companies, maybe with a technology push, so an IP push, actually trying to figure out what the market requires of them is a difficulty in itself. And you may need to put something out onto the market that sort of showcases the features, get some feedback, and then say, okay, so this is the product that we want to make. So it can be a bit of an iterative process where you say, okay, we thought this is a hypothesis, right? We thought this is what we needed. Actually, we've got more information. We need to look at the design again. And I think in the kind of the prototype to product stage, that time just becomes longer, potentially more expensive. You need to put the time up front in understanding what is the product that you're trying to make. Otherwise, there's a kind of operational regulatory pressures to start documenting things, to start making that change more difficult to kind of go do on the fly. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is keep your requirements in early on, but actually changing things later on is quite difficult. And I think that's part of that distinction between pre-prototype and post-prototype, perhaps.
Kind of embracing that iterative process, like you say, sort of being prepared to sort of do a little bit of back and forth. That's really interesting insights, and especially from the different stances as well, all agreeing on that. Jack, did you just want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that's where we've been sort of successful in terms of, and making other companies we work with successful in terms of how we have a little sort of life cycle of how we go about bringing them in and then helping them out as a new business or a new idea. So in terms of it all starts with us basically giving them a dedicated type of account manager for this new project that we're seeing, and then we'll basically go through like a new product conception, design and development with them. So we'll sit down with them, go through all these, and then we'll go into like a small volume prototype, into DFMA, project planning, supply management, and then hopefully the ramp up of that. But it sort of takes that pressure off them, and that's where the whole added value thing comes in from our point of view, to be able to take those pressures away from them, and we can work with them obviously, but help them and get these things moving quicker. So that's where we've had a lot of success. And we've worked with some customers at the moment, and we're doing some medical devices that are now on the sort of ramp up phase, where we're going from 50 offs to thousands offs. So it's it's good to see. It's nice to see an idea go from something this small idea into this big, and it ramps up, and it's very, very interesting, especially for some of these sort of medical devices that we help manufacture. It all makes a difference, doesn't it? So
thank you. And it's just a quick reminder to the audience, please feel free if you have any comments, thoughts and observations to submit submit those into the chat box, and I will gladly pass those to the panel. It's your opportunity to pick the experts' brains whilst you have them. So please don't be shy. Jack, I just wanted to sort of pick up on, you've kind of alluded to it slightly there, but so from a service provider perspective, sort of what are the benefits of outsourcing kind of those later stages of development when it comes to, you know, developing your innovation and product forward? Sort of what's the value add for that, and if there's any pitfalls to avoid there?
I think the main pitfall, I mean, I've seen in sometimes is the case of, you know, we always like to be sort of involved from the beginning. You know, if we're involved from the beginning and we can see the product go through these stages, you know, we've got the people working and the engineers and everyone we put into a certain project, where we can see it develop and we can see areas where we've, you know, before we've worked on similar type projects and we know what to look out for and what, you know, what to do. So when companies come to us, we can always speed up that process a lot quicker for them because we've been there and we've seen the hurdles and things that you need to avoid. So that's being involved from the beginning is obviously very, very good. It's a lot easier for us as well. But in terms of the whole added value type thing, it's from full development, the life cycle of the manufacturer, the consultancy type offering that we can give the, you know, these customers, the rapid prototyping, you know, so we offer services where we can do quick turnaround within 2, 3, 4 days, you know, from a drawing, and then we can, it's called like FastNet is what we call it. We have in-house innovation center. So if it goes into any type of assembly, so we can offer all that as added value. Build notes, so we've got NPI team that we can go through all that with. But it's all about being dynamic, flexible, and, you know, the quick turnaround, I think, especially at that stage. But no, I think it's not really a pitfall, but, you know, to try and get incorporated with a, you know, especially if you're going to be subcontracting it with a company like us, is to get in with them early whilst it's still in that conceptual type idea, because that really is helpful.
Stuart, I just wondered if you had anything you wanted to add in that area.
Yeah, it's kind of complementary to what Jack was saying, in that I suppose it's even more important when you've got new untested technology within your product, to carry that kind of technology developer with you into the product development. So it's not so much of a case of saying, okay, we've got our proof of concept now. Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to somebody who's kind of got an established and a dedicated manufacturing route, because sometimes the manufacturing routes haven't been developed either for that type of product. So part of our role is to help people kind of develop brand new processes and brand new products that haven't really got a set manufacturing route, and that's where having a kind of a longer bridge in between the manufacturer and the technology development can be helpful. I mean, it can be quite a kind of big commercial decision to say, okay, I'm now going to start my Series A, and so kind of building confidence in the product's manufacturability is important as well, and that can often mean trying to make these things in very small volumes initially, before you have the confidence to take it to a more dedicated manufacturer. So it's kind of, yeah, we sort of sit kind of in a complementary space to PCML.
Yeah, I think you're very right in terms of that transition. Sometimes when it's taken from someone who's been developing and doing the prototyping into that next stage, a lot can be lost in translation, I think, and we've seen it happen before. And you know, we don't go into huge mass scale production, but we have partners where we partner up with certain companies that we then give it to, and we've been working with them for years. And it's having that understanding and that collaboration between, you know, as a partners type company where you can, that transition's easy, and that's what your customer needs. At the end of the day, you want to give that customer that good experience. So yeah, it can be tricky, but if it's done in the right way, you know, and the processes and procedures behind it, it's a rewarding process.
Can I throw in something supplemental to that might be overlooked and might not be so exciting, but it's important, which is on the the quality side or regulatory side, which is that, you know, if you're taking a new product to market in this space, you need to operate within a quality management system that's approved. And for young companies, it is often a challenge not only to do, you know, the development of their technology and, you know, get some commercial people around, let alone do design for manufacturing, go to manufacturing, but also implement a quality management system. And it is possible to sit within the quality management system of a partner organization that's doing that design and design for manufacture as an initial step. I mean, ultimately, you'll want to go through that process of setting up your QMS, but it is possible to have a quality agreement with a supplier, and then they can provide some coverages, you know, coverage there as well to help get things moving. And so the partnerships are more than just design for manufacture and manufacturing support. They can do quite a lot else, as well as, you know, helping to identify parts of the supply chain that you might not be able to do on your own.
Yeah, that design history file is one of the key things for the regulatory submission, and yeah, it definitely needs to be done within a quality management framework. So that's one of the outputs that you would get from outsourcing to somebody with a quality system. You get your help with the design history file too.
Ed, from an investor perspective, do you think there are advantages to having sort of the manufacturing in-house as opposed to outsourced?
So I think it varies massively by sector and by technology. I think, I suppose a useful framework to think about it is, I mean, at the early stages of the company's life, you should be optimizing for sort of discovery and what you can find out about your customer needs and your sort of ability to serve it, rather than necessarily margins on your product. And so taking it through that lens, your sort of manufacturing strategy should be, how do you learn the most? And actually in some cases, it is best to do as much of it as you can in-house, because there's going to be a lot that you can learn about that, and you can reduce the sort of feedback loop between your customers getting their hands on, be it prototypes or early samples, and particularly, as you said, sort of on the quality side, where it doesn't make sense, and you probably don't. It's not going to be a sort of core value driver for your business. Where it makes sense to outsource, and there's going to be other places where sort of capital requirements are just prohibitive to do that. So it's a sort of balance of how can you discover as much as you can most cost effectively.
We have had some questions come in from the audience. I might put some people on the spot here. Isaac, did you want to unmute to ask your two questions or not?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's been really informative. I had a couple of questions. One was around when you're at, so we're currently at that proof of concept stage, and we're looking to build a prototype. And often there's a long list of potential optimizations that you could do. But obviously at this moment in time, we're still bootstrapping, right? We still have fundraising to do. So often you can get lost in the kind of mire of different things to try and tackle, ranging all the way from the technical side all the way through to kind of talking to customers and trying to build in ergonomics and design considerations. I just wondered whether anyone on the panel had a kind of framework by which they think is a good way of trying to structure out these problems, and whether there's ways of honing in down to those key features. And then just briefly, the second part is probably a simple one, which is just that how often do you start seeing companies start to bring in sustainability into their prototyping? Is that something that you see at this stage? Or you wait until you're kind of more developed before you start having those considerations?
I'm happy to tackle the first one a little bit, which is, you said a key word there, which is customer. So the fact that you have some customer engagement, that's really what should drive this in terms of what Jack and Stuart have referred to, the customer requirements documentation. Basically saying these are the design requirements that we need to meet based on what our customers are saying. There may be things that you feel are critically important, and if they're absolutely essential and you don't think the customers can achieve what they want without doing those things, and those should be included. But avoid the temptation to add all the bells and whistles if your customers aren't asking for it. And sample as many people as possible and try to alight on what you think is the minimum set, and get through that first loop of trying to get something out to those customers and getting their feedback. On sustainability, I assume you're meaning sort of environmental sustainability, like recyclable materials, etc. That I think other people can possibly put into. We're now, I say 15 years. Yes, it's the 15th birthday of the company's founding as at Company's House. But first money in was like in 2009, so it's maybe 11 years going. But only now are we starting to consider some sustainability things around our packaging. The cardboard boxes that package our units. I'd love to say that we have looked into the injection molding of plastics for our instruments and tried to reduce the carbon in those. But one of the challenges of being early stage quite often is that your volumes are too small to really drive a lot of demand within a supply chain. It's bad enough maybe getting attention for pricing on something, or getting a supplier who might be willing to supply a small number of components, let alone finding a manufacturer who can manufacture that scale. I think if you can build in some sustainability from the get-go, that's great. But I think you'd probably find it difficult. But I'm hoping to be proven wrong.
Yeah, just to pick up on that sustainability. Yeah, it is hard to have that as a kind of a key driver sometimes, especially in the medical field, where you need to have sterility as a prime concern, and you see a lot of single-use components out there. I mean, we have had cases where people have come to us and said, let's consider the kind of the life cycle of these products, and thinking about the disposal route and what mitigations you can use. So it's kind of like after the fact, can you think of a disposal route that allows us to kind of recover some of the components, or is it after you've developed the product, can you change some of the aspects of it? But one of the other things that we see in the life sciences field is obviously a trend towards miniaturization, and so I give an example: microfluidics. You can do a drug discovery campaign, not using tens of thousands of well plates, but now tens of thousands of small chips or small channels or small droplets. And so some of the trends in the industry are allowing us to be more sustainable anyway, sort of as a byproduct. So I think that's a good trend. It's sort of accidental, but certainly there is more sustainability emerging within this industry anyway.
Ed, out of interest, does sustainability play into any of your sort of decisions, investor decisions? I would have thought it did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of our sort of core investment criteria. I think by their very nature, virtually all of the companies we invest in are sort of have a positive impact. Otherwise, we wouldn't be investing in them. But from a sustainability perspective, to your question, Isaac, I think depending on the stage of the company, I think there would need to be a clear strategy on how to minimize that. But we wouldn't necessarily expect the stage you're at for that to be a very firm plan.
And Felicity, did you want to unmute to ask your question? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Alicia. Thanks for having us today, and there have been great insights from the panel. I think we've had quite a lot of conversation relating to prototyping and manufacturing, but I wanted to ask if there were any particular challenges that come to mind when actually transitioning from those different stages. So when you go from proof of concept to prototyping and then prototyping to manufacturing, scale up and beyond, was there anything that you've learned either through supporting or funding or your own experiences that you thought would be worth highlighting and useful to know?
I can jump in with I think the biggest thing being the team and the different skill sets required for those different stages, and they are very different. And actually, someone who is going to develop the most exciting proof of concept might possibly, but is unlikely to have the sort of design for manufacture quality experience that you need when you're moving to production. So I think that's a very big focus in a company moving through these stages, is getting the right expertise as it sort of evolves.
Yeah, I can add to that. I mean, certainly the people part is very important, but also the partnering part. You know, unless you're going to do all of your manufacturing internally, and even those that manufacture internally, they're not going to be making their own microprocessors. And so, you know, if anyone's paid attention to the news over the last 2 years, you know that global supply chains are a bit of a challenge, and that certainly affects people manufacturing, but also going through scale up. And you know, what you find with, if you're doing contract manufacturing with a third party, is that they may have a carrying capacity of what they can put through, and their own supply chain management groups may be great at certain things and not so good at others. And so you start to look at, you know, second sourcing for critical components as a company. That might mean tying up cash in buying ahead components, so that you've got the next couple of years de-risked. You know, I don't know how Tesla managed to get away with manufacturing so many cars without losing parts, but it's a pretty tough world out there, finding chipsets, regardless of what you're using them for. So, you know, certainly supply chain, as the volume of what you're making increases, it comes with a benefit, which is you become more important to the supply chain, and so you get better attention, you can get better pricing, and it can help you get your volumes. But it also creates the challenge of, you know, if your shipping volumes are very high, you know, a little hiccup can mean a huge hurt. And so there's a lot of, you know, forward planning, forward buying, to manage manufactured flow.
We're saying that, I mean, that is a whole skill set of its own, managing suppliers and procurement.
And it's such fun these days. It's not my job, but more and more of these companies that are joining in today will have to deal with those problems soon and increase the scope of what's happening locally.
It's actually quite an important point, though, because when it comes to liaising with different sorts of teams and, you know, that interface between different companies, sometimes there is a way to do things and there isn't a way to do things, and it can make a huge difference. And that can sometimes be overlooked, as in it's not critical, but having experience and knowledge that maybe companies that have been there and done that, you know, you can share that with up and coming and emerging companies, can actually be really beneficial. Isaac, I've just seen another question. Did you want to unmute for that? Thank you.
I'm hogging all the questions. You can tell me to shut up if needed. It was just coming back to that concept around customer feedback. And it's like, whenever you speak to someone, it's like customers, absolutely. But there are good ways and bad ways of getting that feedback. And I just wondered whether there was any tips on either of those, you know, instances which have been bad, but also tips to do it right.
Don't lead the witness. That's what we always tell our R&D team. They always ask the question like, do you think that having a Bluetooth thing might be helpful here? And it's like, yeah, sure. Oh, Bluetooth is required. No, you didn't ask that question properly. So
it's yeah, so it's almost kind of like you want to fly on the wall. So you want to actually just observe somebody doing something. Don't ask them, how do you do it, or would it be easier if you could do this? No, just watch them doing it, or maybe watch people with different experience levels doing it. See what the common mistakes that people make are. That will make it easier to use. But yeah, it's like Eric said, not leading the witness, but actually carefully observing and documenting what you see will help you draw better conclusions.
So I probably deal with a level of abstraction higher than that, and so I would say that the simplest thing you can do is try and get someone to pay for it, and whether that's pay for a trial or pay for a prototype if it's obviously not in a clinical application, but I mean that's the only real way of validating how valuable it is to them.
Jack, did you have any thoughts around the customer feedback question?
I mean, around feedback in terms of our feedback is very much in terms of how we've performed for the customer, really. So it's probably in a bit of a different slant, but our feedback's always done as a bit of a group shot at different customers, really. Probably a bit different to what they're alluding to there.
Thanks so much for your questions, Isaac and Felicity, much appreciated. Stuart, I just wanted to come to you actually, because you're sitting on this interface of biotech and technology, and they're both kind of very present in Cambridge. And I think the idea of the panel discussion, is around kind of this prototyping concept, but, we have focused it on the Cambridge region, and, all panelists have a presence in Cambridge, and obviously One Nucleus is here to kind of, help enable the success locally and internationally. So in the pre-panel catch-up, we kind of discussed the role of novel technologies in enabling this kind of transition. Did you want to just say a word or two about that?
Yeah, so as an example, I'll talk a little bit about cell therapy and cell therapy manufacture. That's something that there's companies in Cambridge who are kind of involved in developing new manufacturing techniques, mainly because cell therapy as a field's not that old. It's grown out of academia, but it's a completely new way of making medicines, in that first of all you would use chemicals, then you would use cells to make the drugs, and now the medicine is the cells themselves. So there's actually a lot more close relationship between the manufacturing part and getting an effective medicine into the patients. And so more than previously, the technology around manufacturing processes is really critical to the success of these products. And so a place like Cambridge with such a kind of rich heritage of engineering and process development is a really good place to come for that sort of cell therapy manufacturing activity, in a way that it's hasn't been historically for other. It's kind of been a bit more of a broader geographical spread for other types, and some of the things that technology can help with in cell therapy manufacturing. It's a very kind of labor intensive and very costly process, and it uses a lot of off-the-shelf equipment that's not been designed for that specific purpose. And so it's a kind of a little bit of imagination to develop processes which kind of go outside those pieces of equipment to bring the costs down, to help the products be made faster, identify what the bottlenecks are, and just make the process easier to run without having an army of PhD level technicians running it. It is really a very complicated process to run. So I think there is a lot of scope for innovations in manufacturing to help in that particular sector. So that's just kind of my spin on how technology can impact biopharma. But there's so many other examples where new products can make things easier, make things more accessible, widen the reach, and help more people.
And certainly a very worthy sort of therapeutic area, sort of the advanced medicines, and something that our region can really embrace, given, as you say, we're well positioned to kind of lead the earlier and later stage development. So watch this space, I think, is the takeaway from that. I'm kind of jumping about here, but I think a very other pertinent point to make is around the regulatory perspective. And again, Eric, we had a quick catch up, didn't we? And you said it would be good to kind of highlight sort of upcoming changes in this respect. Did you want to say a word or two about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd preface this by saying I'm not a regulatory consultant or a regulatory person. It's just I'm bombarded with our regulatory and quality team every time I go downstairs. And what I wanted to highlight for people that may not be aware is that there have been a couple of significant changes. One that's coming in next month, which is the IVDR, in vitro diagnostics regulations, and then the other came into being last year, the medical device regulations. And these were changes in how devices were regulated. That prior to that, a medical device could basically be self-certified if you manufactured under your quality system and completed all of the required risk and quality assessments. You could self-certify that and put it into the market without having to do a clinical trial, which made commercializing in Europe a lot simpler than it was to commercialize in the US. And so quite often medical device companies would go to Europe first and then go to the US once they'd had a lot more clinical evidence. That's changed dramatically. It's now easier to get a device approved in the US than it is in Europe. And Brexit did not make that any easier because there's also a corresponding set of regulations, basically the UK MDR that's I think alleged to be approved and published next year. And then there's also the UK CE mark that's coming through the UK Conformity Assessment Group. Why do I even mention this in the context of prototypes? Because it matters, because if you're going to take something into the market, there's now this additional hurdle, which is having clinical evidence before you can have an approval and start selling your device. And so it's added money and time onto what was traditionally an already difficult route. And I think it needs to be highlighted. That said, groups like the MHRA for the UK have done things where they've kind of anticipated that prototypes need to go through some iterative loops. And so what you can do when you're going to do your clinical investigation is have maybe a small series of prototype models that may have some variations in them. And you can see how those play out in a clinical setting and not have to go through a whole new resubmission. If you have to undergo basically a big design change, then that requires a new submission, but you can do this sort of pack of prototype models to go into clinic. And I was just going to highlight that as it touches on prototyping, and that's the topic here. But the main thing to highlight is that, yes, the world has changed. It's now more difficult to take something in things like the PIP breast implant scandal and other things that have happened. If you enjoyed watching Theranos documentaries or read the book, clearly the medical device industry needed some regulatory backbone more than it had in Europe, but it does come at the cost of increased time to market and increased cost because of that increased time.
Thank you very much indeed, Eric. So we are coming up to almost the end of the session. If there are any sort of last minute burning questions, there are some time if you wanted to drop those in. I just thought I'd try and bring the panel to a close. So the title of the session might have seemed controversial to some. Does Cambridge go beyond prototype? It's an open question to the panel. Does anyone feel like we need to do some myth busting around that question? Often we're seen as very early stage innovation and more sort of heavy in that area, but is that a correct representation? Again, it will depend on product type, sector, etc. Any thoughts from the panel on that?
I think it's quite I think it's true in some circumstances, but I mean we're based in Cambridge, and a lot predominantly, I'd say a big majority of our customers are in the Cambridge area, and not all of it's not all of it's prototype and innovation. A lot of it's still parts that have and parts for devices and stuff that have need manufacturing, and they're already in mass production. and they come to us for that. So I think it's very much a mixture in my eyes.
Yeah, I'd say the kind of the reputation is probably well justified. We do have a great strength in early stage, but actually more and more we see demand for people wanting to develop that further and see actually the value that keeping the technology developers on board for longer has. So it's, yeah, I mean, probably 5 years ago, we'd have been tentative to say that we would do small volumes of product for clinical trial, but that's certainly our aspiration to kind of spread more into supporting our clients on the clinical trials and small series manufacture, because we definitely see there's a demand for it. So Cambridge probably will begin to be known, probably, especially for some of the high value products that are being developed in the region, that we can keep some of the manufacturing here as well.
I would say, yeah, I have sort of vested interest to say, yes, it's changing. It's not there yet, but with Cambridge Medical Robotics, global sales, Endomag global sales, there aren't too many medical device companies that are of that sort of earlier stage scale that are in the UK that are doing that. But yet we don't have, Medtronic is not here, Stryker is not here, Becton Dickinson is not here. I think they will come because they'll see the increasing strength of this life sciences industry around here. But I'm also hoping we'll see more homegrown companies, not just medical devices, but in vitro diagnostics, et cetera. But it takes iterative loops, not just within a company, but iterative loops within a network, iterative loops within investor base, to help catalyze it. And I think we're on the way. It's an exciting time. I'm just pleased to be part of this cluster doing something on a global basis.
I agree with all that, and I think it's now coming. But it is in the high value sector. It's never going to be in the sort of commoditized
needles
low value products. But there's some good precedents, and I'll shout out to CMR Surgical, as you said, which is a CIC portfolio company.
You're on mute, Alicia.
Oops. Sorry. Yeah, Alicia, you're sort of. There we go.
Have you got me back? Yeah.
Yeah.
You can hear me, yeah? Sorry. Okay, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, just sort of thank you to everyone for joining, and to all of the panelists, and for the attendees for staying on the line. Really insightful, really fantastic to have all of your expertise and experiences to date to contribute to the discussion, and I hope everyone found it valuable. I'll send out a post webinar email with a link to the recording. As I said, you're welcome to share that with colleagues or contacts you think may also find the content useful. From a One Nucleus side, we do have a jam-packed events in person and virtual calendar. So tomorrow we're back with a life science marketing group webinar on marketing strategies. And then the following day, we've actually got an in-person event at Babraham on artificial intelligence in clinical development. So lots of upcoming networking opportunities as well. So with that, I'm going to bring the session to a close and just wish you all a very good evening. Thank you all for your time. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your questions.
Have a good one.